We are honoring an Upstate man who helped end one of the darkest periods in world history. Now, today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's a day to honor the 6 million Jewish people who were killed, along with millions of others.
Well, in the city of Greer, an ongoing project is helping honor this local liberator. Fox Carolina's Zach Perletsky shares his story.
Here he was, just an upstate South Carolinian, growing up in Greer, then going to Clemson to college. I can't imagine him ever thinking that just 3 years later he would be in Europe fighting other people and then finding this camp.
Among many things, Horace Berry was a husband, father, friend.
He was very genuine. He was the same with everybody. He wasn't one way, one person, and a different with another. And really taught my brother and me to respect others, and he did.
Before beginning his career in the peach and apple crop business, Berry was freeing Jews from concentration camps like Gunskirchen and helping bury their dead.
He would tell us that there was just no way to describe the cruelty that he witnessed, and that he didn't know that kind of evil existed.
The Greer native son, Ladson Berry, says his father would never talk about his experiences as a captain during World War II, only finding out what he witnessed when he did a testimony with SCE-TV and the South Carolina Council on the Holocaust in the early 1990s.
They were starved. They were literally starved. And some of them had knowledge enough to know what was going on, but most of them didn't. They just sitting around dazed, trying to pick lice off themselves.
About a year after finally sharing his story, Berry passed away.
I think sometimes we forget about the liberators who were not only heroes and not only did incredible things, but they also bear witness.
Marla Palmer is the secretary for the South Carolina Council on the Holocaust.
It is by remembering the past that we can live better in the future.
To help honor Berry and his role as a liberator, the city of Greer is participating in the Butterfly Project, which remembers the 1.5 million children who died during the Holocaust and will eventually create an art installation that will be placed in this park in his honor.
He got a letter personally thanking him from one of the survivors of the camp, his son later, and then he shared that with me. And I think that brought to reality that there were many people who may have still died had they not gotten me when they had.
In Greer, Zach Perletsky, Fox Carolina News.
Important day to remember. You can find more stories just like this one in our free Fox Carolina News app.